Hello, and welcome to another episode of MetaViews. This is our automated media network series where we're looking at the many ways in which media production is being automated, the way in which it's making media production more accessible, it's making it easier for people to do their jobs, and it's perhaps making creativity and other forms of expression more diverse, more expansive, more possible. It's really an exploratory way of trying to understand this exciting industry and this exciting genre. And so I'm really happy for today's episode to bring in a guest, Chad Thiele, who is the organizer of the AI Content Dojo, which is both a website in the form of a resource, but it's also a community that I stumbled into and I've certainly been learning a lot from. So it's a pleasure to have you here today, Chad. And I kind of wanted to start with the sort of basic question of, how did you get here? What was it about automated writing and GPT-3 in particular that kind of caught your attention and made you think, wow, this is cool. I got to check this out.
Well, first, thanks for having me here. As far as getting into that stuff, honestly, stumbled upon it at first, kind of like probably you did, and I enjoy writing, but I enjoy the ability to sort of have it generated in a sense too, like just the mystery of what, like, is it possible really? And
Mm-hmm.
then GPT-3, yeah, it actually kind of is. So it's interesting, and
Well,
that's what sparked it for me.
and what's your background? I assume as a marketer, because that's sort of part of your focus. But blogging, social media. Previous to this, as an abstract a question as this may be, what was your relationship with words?
Yeah, blogging basically since the internet started, but always in that way that like I would write something, I'd kind of have a good go at it, but always just kind of quit a little bit before it became a success or something. And there's a lot of times where I kind of kick myself for doing that. There's some ideas I had in the past that they should have lasted, but you know, quit too soon kind of thing. Um, and more of my background has been, well, ever since I started studying in computer science and stuff like that. And my more of my introduction into AI was through the cybersecurity side of things and how AI is making some advancements in that field to kind of be a more proactive defense instead of reactive. But the being in AI and noticing GPT-3 kind of there off to the side kind of happen too is what kind of really connected it for me.
Well, and there's two parts there that I really resonate with. One, I too have littered the internet with blogs that I started and later abandoned that I now regret and think, wow, what a wasted opportunity in terms of the what later became maybe an interesting niche or what later became interesting knowledge. And similarly,
Yeah.
there's a bunch of books that I've started over the years that the first thoughts I had when playing with some of these tools was, maybe in the seeds of that book, I could finish it using an automated tool. I could take the argument I made, I could take the examples that I collected and organize them in a way that makes it a little easier. And that's where I think we shared a similar belief in the potential of this technology that it's not going to replace human writing. It's not going to replace the sort of need to be creative, but it sure can be fuel on the fire. It can really grease the wheels of being able to write, either in a brainstorming capacity or in helping you kind of flesh it out and really grind it out. So, what have your writing experiences been? What have some of the examples or projects that you've used these tools either experimentally or more practically?
Well, I mean, you kind of nailed it right there. Is when you first start writing, obviously is the first thing to get past. But once I mean, you can even have just sort of mini writer's blocks, like in the middle of all your content. You could be going through your outline, or if you didn't even do an outline, you're kind of halfway through, and get distracted by something, and when you come back, you're not really sure how to finish. And the AI can definitely assist with that. Even if you were to just let the AI write as much as possible and just sort of see what happens, and then maybe remove it because it's not a perfect fit, but it would spark some interest in maybe a tangent or something that, oh, yeah, this was something that would fit well with my article. Maybe not exactly that way, but I can work it in. And so just being able to have some tool that is not you going out there and having to do a ton of research and make between things yourself is a huge help, as far as just being productive.
Well, and as you sort of evoked, it does play the combination of kind of brainstorm and search engine, because it is acting as a kind of search engine while also playing a bit of prediction or autocomplete in terms of giving you suggestions. And, a lot of the resources that you've made available, I'm just going to bring up your website. A lot of the resources that you've made available via your AI Content Dojo are great examples and kind of great brainstorms of exercises that you can do to really leverage GPT-3 in general. And here I kind of want to get to the meat of what I think is relevant in terms of your research, that there's quite a range of GPT-3 services out there. So it's the same back end, it's the same AI or the same natural language processing engine, but these are different applications that have created different interfaces and different utilities to access that engine. And I assume that you've gone through quite a few and you've sort of zeroed in on your favorite. Do you want to describe, what that is and why you like it so much and why you think it's the current kind of best in class when it comes to the apps leveraging GPT-3?
Well, I don't think it's any secret that Shortly AI is the one I've picked. There's a couple of reasons for it. The primary being just that it's the simplest. And I have a little bit of that sort of underdog kind of appeal from it, where it doesn't seem to have a lot of market. It doesn't seem to have a lot of what is it, word of mouth happening around it. But it's powerful under the surface, and that's the kind of thing that sort of interests me, because you can get started with it on a very surface level, and it'll do the really interesting, right for you type of situations where you just click the button and it kind of finishes your paragraph or something for you. But it has more for you to discover, and it's that sort of almost, still to this day, I'm still discovering ways of making use of it. And so there's a few different ingredients in there that kind of come together, one being the blank canvas. You can write almost anything you want anywhere, and let the AI kind of assist you along the way. It also doesn't have a credit limit. Like in the early days of all these tools, they had credit limits, and it's totally understandable why they would do that, because every time somebody hits that AI button, it's costing that company some money. They have to pay for that API call to GPT-3, OpenAI. And so they were doing it to protect themselves, just in case, you get people who overwork their system for, not paying any different prices or anything than the regular users who used it more normally, I guess. But that credit limit, it's kind of a sting, isn't it? When that result that comes back is not a fit for what you're trying to write, and you just feel like, oh, I just burned through like 2 credits or 5. Some of them, they base the credits off of like the number of words returned and stuff. So you're like, oh, I just burned. I can't do that much more. So the credit limits types of things, it didn't have one, so that kind of got me into it too. And just compared to the other ones, most everything else on the market at the time was forms. You would go through filling out forms. It didn't feel like writing. It just felt like generation of content versus writing. So there's Shortly sitting there alone doing the writing thing, and so that's why I gravitated towards it.
Well, and that's a good point. It feels so much of the other apps that I've tried, at least, are kind of robotic, right? They're not really focused on you being the creative engine, right? They're more focused on treating the GPT-3 engine transactionally, both in the form of credits, but also in the way it tries to pigeonhole and narrow your requests. Versus Shortly AI feels like a word processor, feels like a very clean word processor. And, when powered with the guides that you've written, and, especially now the Facebook group that you have in terms of the tips that people share, you can really get a sense as to how to develop a workflow, how to develop a writing flow in which you're naturally sort of evoking and calling all the different auto generation tools in a way that is not automatic writing, but it is, the difference between running and driving a car. That both are getting from point A to point B. Both are essentially controlled by the human, but one is tremendously faster than the other. And I think it speaks to the kind of potential and opportunities that this stuff affords. Now, you've also, interestingly enough, gotten into looking at Shortly AI as part of a suite of other kind of features and tools. Do you want to describe sort of where you see Shortly AI situated in a larger ecosystem of tools in which, you're using Shortly AI for writing, but then there's other tools as well that help shape the content experience. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, within Shortly it has them as well, right? You have the things like within the instruct command that give you the ability to invoke a lot of those things just right there in line inside of your writing. But since it is a blank canvas, other tools that are out there, things like Phrase or maybe even Surfer or something, if you're really into the SEO side of things, they can just, you don't really need an integration for it. You can just use those tools naturally as they were designed and then just plug them in with Shortly because it's just basically like you said, a word processor. Um, but I did want to kind of mention something too. You were talking about how those forms based ones felt transactional. And I think in a sense they're kind of promoting that generation of content, instead of writing, like you were kind of alluding to there, is they very much try to sell themselves on we're going to do the writing and generate the content for you so that you can just blast off and not do anything and traffic happens magically and all that kind of stuff. And I think there's going to be a lot of people who realize that maybe that isn't quite so true. The best way to get content from GPT-3 is, if you've watched any of my videos, it's the dance.
Mm-hmm.
You write a little bit, the AI writes a little bit, kind of compare notes and move on. Do keep doing that throughout your article, and that's how GPT-3 will give you the best results.
Well,
It
and
just
do
so
you
happens that, yeah, sorry.
I was gonna say, do you want to elaborate a bit on that dance? Because I think it doesn't only apply to GPT-3, but I think it gives us a glimpse as to our relationship with AI and automation in general. That it's never going to
Yeah.
be this magic wand that takes care of everything. It's always going to require a certain level of human interaction and even human supervision. So I think you quite eloquently described this as a dance, right? As like a one step, two step. Do you want to elaborate on sort of what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean it's kind of like it's your AI assistant, right? You need to have that sort of other person there, the other entity in this case, to be able to either bounce ideas off of or just get into the flow or rhythm of your creation. And so I think dance is a good way of describing it. I think the more sort of concrete way of describing it in something, when you're in the middle of writing your sentence, there's a certain point where you can stop. Like you write your sentence and you get to the point where you're confident what the rest of the sentence you would just type, but instead of typing it, let's just see what the GPT-3 AI comes up with. And a lot of times you'll probably be surprised that it uses the same words that you would have typed anyways. And so there's the savings. And then also, I like to say just serendipity, part of a good dance is it comes up with some more. And it often is surprisingly, good content too. And I think that's why the dance is so important is you get what you wanted because you let it well in the dance, and then you get a little bit more out of it with a good dance partner.
Well, and to your earlier point, if it was a credit based system, it would discourage you from putting in those extra twirls. It would discourage you from, having another song. When in reality, it's that iteration that I think leverages that true creative potential. Because when I've used Shortly, to your point, sometimes it's taken me in a new direction and I've gone that way, right? Because like, oh yeah, great, I could do that. That makes sense. And I've still written several paragraphs myself after. So it's not as if it did the writing. It just said, why don't you go down that path, buddy? And I'm like, sure, all right, that looks interesting. And so I think there's an opportunity, to your point, for that kind of serendipity. How do you see, and not just Shortly, but the genre or the field in general? Where do you see it going from here? I mean, I think you've already noted some copycats of Shortly, that other people have kind of noticed that it's a successful model. Are we going to have a situation where everyone's copying from each other, or are we going to have some like radical departures in which we see some really interesting and creative stuff?
Yeah. Of course, I think it's going to be essentially that, I wouldn't say a race to the bottom, so to speak, but kind of that whole, eventually at some point, all of the apps are going to have all of the things, and not really much you can do about it because it's not like one of the tools can go out and say, well, this is mine and I patent it, because it's all behind the scenes, GPT-3s, it's OpenAI's rules. Now, interestingly, you might see some advantages to the early movers, depending on how OpenAI kind of continues their rules changes, the ways that different apps can use their API calls, where some of the older tools might be grandfathered into some more lenient API calls, I should say, where the amount of content or the type of content that can be retrieved from the GPT-3 AI could be a little bit more robust in a sense. And I guess some in the audience might have recognized this, especially in the early days when a lot of tools would come up with some features, and then all of a sudden, like a day or two later, the feature was gone. And more or less, that was because OpenAI was like, whoa, 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 that's going a little bit too far. we don't want that. And there is a stipulation in their terms that it's worded interestingly. It's something like they don't want the scalable generation of SEO content.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so they're trying to kind of fine tune those rules to make sure that stuff doesn't end up the result of what these tools do, which is probably, yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, which is kind of the reason why some of those more transactional type applications might steer more towards what Shortly's doing and end up kind of I'm a writer too.
Yeah.
And then it'll be who's doing it in a more refined way and who's getting the results that, I call it the golden ratio. Basically, if the more reliable the content that comes back meets your needs, the more reliably that application can do that, that's going to be the application people end up gravitating towards versus all the flashy bells and whistles.
And I think there is this larger notion of, pollution in the information ecosystem, that for these tools to be successful, for OpenAI as a kind of platform to be successful, these things have to work. They have to be effective. And if it becomes pollution, if it becomes spam, then it's not going to be effective because people just tune it out. And so I think there is a kind of fine line that needs to be walked. And that's part of what we try to focus on in terms of the automated media network, of not only how to make these tools more accessible, but anticipating what the rules might be to govern them. But the other big subject I want to talk to you about was community, right? And any technology really depends upon the community of developers behind it, the community of users, the people who really give purpose and give body to it. Now, OpenAI has been criticized recently for shutting down the Slack that existed around GPT-3 that allowed developers and other users to use it, they've moved towards a kind of forum on their website. Whereas what I've seen in your case is you run a Facebook group that is growing, I think, quite substantively. It seems really popular. There's always new posts from a wide range of people. And I think it's rapidly becoming a very valuable resource demonstrating that communities matter, and the way in which communities kind of gather around these tools and help everyone use these tools, I think, is central. So quick two-part question. What motivated you to start this community, and what are your thoughts on it in terms of its success and its sort of the direction that you'd like to take it?
Well, I'm actually really surprised because I've tried these types of things before, and you never really get past 10 or 20 people just because they happen to be friends, and they join just because. And for all of this to be taking off so fast, I mean, not just the website and the traffic on the website is, of course, it's exploding too. But I mean, for something a project that's only roughly 2 months old, I mean, I have to pinch myself sometimes to even like fathom that this was possible. I imagine that I wouldn't be at this sort of juncture for another year or so at least, but I think it's because of the AI and how the general, like, people are interested in this too. But the community, like you said, I mean, it's pretty much everything now. And I learn more from them than I do from my own experiments, more or less now. I've given them the boost to a certain point, and then they're taking it in new directions, and I'm learning from them. And luckily, I get to compile it and kind of maybe orchestrate it a little bit with the group. But I mean, I think the most important part is just, caring about it, and participating in a human way versus just making it like, here's my new thing, here's my new thing, here's my new thing. Just talk to people, have
Yeah.
a conversation and just share yourself with everyone versus here's the new thing. I think that's important.
Well, and to your point, I mean, I think we both share a background in terms of trying to be fire starters, people who start blogs, people who start online groups, and rarely do they take off. Like, usually you get them, so it's like a nice little campfire, you can roast some marshmallows, but you always dream of the blaze, right? You always dream of, like, the really hot community that is going. And so, it is, I think, on the one hand, congratulations in this case, but it's also the right place at the right time, right? That this is, a really ripe topic, and I think people are interested in it. Are you following stuff beyond GPT-3 in terms of the broader kind of field of automated content production and automated media?
Yeah, to a certain degree. I mean, the AI Content Dojo is not purely about GPT-3. It's about anything from brainstorming to publishing to promotion. All the steps in between they would take for you to do that. So any tool that comes up anywhere in that spectrum is on the table. Right now, I mean, the most prominent thing to talk about is Shortly because of it has that learning curve, and I want to get people past that. But before that, people do need to learn how to do or get to the research phase and make sure that they're not just creating content to create content. There's a plan or a strategy or a reason behind it. So there's tools like Phrase and others like Market Muse and stuff out there that I guess to a certain degree they're AI, but they don't really feel like AI like in the way that GPT-3 is. Beyond that, as far as more content creation, you have Dolly coming that's going to be creating images, which looks, I mean, for me, it'd be fantastic if it could create YouTube video covers for me just on the
Mm-hmm.
fly.
Or
That
even
would be
basic
very
stock
helpful
imagery, right? I think would be very welcome.
for sure. Yeah, that's, I mean, just seeing their demo where they say something like, create an avocado shaped chair, and I mean, some of those chairs it creates some of them look like drawings, some of them look like renders. They're really good. So if that's what it's doing, yeah, that could be really interesting in the future. especially paired with something like Shortly, where you could, like you said, get some stock photography in there exactly at the point where it needs to be and matches the content.
That'd be
It'd be
nuts.
crazy.
Now, what, for your own purposes, like where I looked at your Tokyo Spark site, which, is a really kind of fascinating guide to Japanese culture and Tokyo's culture, urban culture. What are the types of applications that, given the enough time and resources, that you would use these tools to create or to play with?
As in terms of Tokyo Spark,
Or just in general?
I mean that one is would be. I think right now it's Shortly to get the content in there, right? It's in a way that, well, and actually that's an interesting um, angle because Tokyo Spark uses a lot of Japanese language mixed in with the English. And right now, the tools don't do a fantastic job at doing
Mm-hmm.
that. So it might be something in the future that a tool might be able to assist with or something. Language, the effects of different languages and stuff. As far as if you're if you're writing in something in say like French, like I just saw in the AI Content Dojo Facebook group recently, they were talking about being able to write in French and Shortly, and I think that that's not the challenge. The challenge is going to be how do you mix the languages in the content, especially with things like Japanese, where most of my I can't really use like real Japanese. I can't use kanji and hiragana and katakana in the middle of my content because, well, most people wouldn't be able to read it, the English readers that come to the site. So you write it in something that's called Romaji, which is Japanese characters in using Japanese language using Roman characters. And GPT-3 can't do that very well. And
Mm-hmm.
it kind of can, but it usually messes it up and you have to fix it. So I think that would be one thing that AI could do better in the future. But then you got to get past the content creation piece too. You need some better AI to do things after you're done writing. And I'm not really sure how they would do certain, the next steps like after publishing and doing promotion, because most of them seem to be more geared towards marketing and marketer product and e-commerce and stuff, and not for bloggers.
Well, and that's the other issue, that GPT-3 is a showcase for OpenAI in terms of their ambitions, but one has to assume Google is working on similar technology, and Google could integrate that with Google Translate and integrate that with Google AdWords or other types of promotional vehicles to give someone the hey, we'll help you write your book and publish it and sell it and ship it to their door. It will be Amazon's pitch in a similar capacity. Do you feel that GPT, and this is a speculative question. I don't expect you to have a well thought out answer. I'm really asking you to think on your feet here. But do you think that there are other potential competitors to GPT-3 when it comes to, automatic writing and automatic word recognition, coming from Facebook, from Google, from Amazon, who clearly have this type of technology in the works?
Yeah, I think that is definitely an interesting question because at what point could OpenAI's GPT-3 efforts be kind of cut off at the knees, right? When a big player like Google that moves in. I mean, even though OpenAI is backed by Microsoft now, that I think, I mean, you already know that Google has like a multiple trillion parameter AI database out there or AI model out there. Is that ever going to be usable by us regular people that want to create content? I have a feeling probably not. That's probably going to be their end as far as maybe combating spam and things like that within the search algorithms. Maybe eventually someday being what they use to do, Google answers, maybe behind voice search and stuff like that. The answers you might get back will be generated by AI. There's a good chance for that in the future, which might decimate a lot of blogs and traffic that we get these days. But I think there's an up and comer that's actually open source. The GPT Neo AI looks pretty promising.
Right on. Do you want to elaborate a bit about that while I Google it and bring it up?
Sure. It's essentially an open source competitor in a sense to GPT-3. It's not as big yet. I think their biggest model is 1.9 or something like that. Maybe they have a 2.7. Um, is it 2.7 billion parameter?
Yeah, 2.7 billion is
Yep.
their larger.
Yep. Yeah. So that's a inside of GPT-3 they have different they have DaVinci and Curie and Ada and different numbers of parameters that they offer in their solution. And DaVinci is sort of the one that everybody has in mind right now because that's the two. I think it's 2.7 billion parameters inside of theirs. It might be a little bit more inside of GPT-3, but the GPT Neo they don't use the same algorithms to achieve their results. And in a lot of cases, it's relatively close. In some cases, it's actually beating out GPT-3, and so it's kind of almost there.
Yeah.
And being open source, that one could be the thing that a lot of these tools might start, using to save costs and also maybe I think an interesting situation would be if they kind of paired GPT Neo with GPT-3 in a sense where they might use Neo to help build the inputs and the prompts that are sent to GPT-3 for their results. Might be something to look at in the future for them.
Well, and this is where we start getting into an ecosystem of assistants or of, agents that all interact with each other. And again, it comes back to the human and how they dance with them and how they conduct this, orchestra of autonomous agents. So, the last sort of question or frame I have for you, which you sort of addressed there when you were talking about I think the open source side, which is the accessibility. Like, this is part of why I love the work you're doing. And, I certainly encourage anyone watching this to check out AIContentDojo.com and check out the Facebook group, in that you really are helping people wrap their heads around what's possible and how to use these tools. So, both in your personal context, but also in an open context, what do you think is necessary to make these tools more accessible and relevant to people, so that instead of them being kind of obscure, because I feel that they still, even though they are exploding in interest and popularity, they still really are kind of niche and they still really are kind of obscure. So what do you think, both in terms of the community you're running, but also like the advice you would give to a company like Shortly AI? What do they need to do to make their tools more accessible and therefore more successful?
Mm. Oh, well, I would think one would be time. I mean, it's just going to take a certain amount of time. There's a lot of mindset right now, especially for the previous generation of these tools was really not good, and they were more for they kind of give that sense of spam, like people are just
Yeah.
you would just generate content that was not good, but it was everywhere. And so those types of tools were being pushed. And so now it's another AI tool to them and to more the real community who are like the bloggers and the writers that want to write. So they have to get past that hurdle where the AI is not spam content. And that sort of goes back to what we were talking about before. If if people are using GPT-3 as to generate content, they're going to end up in the same kind of boat as the previous generation of those tools. And, one of the things I kind of started thinking about recently was that these AI tools, like, they'll make a good writer great, they'll make a great writer amazing, but they're not really going to take a mediocre writer and turn them into something special. You have to have that drive to actually, you still need to spend the time, like you said, the human still has to drive and you have to take that time to actually produce a piece of content that is that I have the perfect article checklist on one of my guides. It's essentially you're not just creating the content just to create it. You got to have a reason. You got to have your reader in mind. And I think that reader in mind part is where these tools can really take advantage to get that. If they can give somebody who's got that sort of pessimistic mindset about it and give them that aha moment that, okay, from my perspective, whether they're a blogger or a creative or maybe a marketer, that this tool can actually help them and not sort of fake generate spam for them, then they can start onboarding more and kind of spreading the word quickly,
Right
I
on.
think.
And I think that point about examples, right? Especially case examples outside of, not just spam, but associated worlds of automated marketing. Whether it's in business pitches, whether it's in, short stories. Like, I think there's a wide range of examples that the more these companies demonstrate those examples, the wider their potential customer base, right? The wider the amount of people who might see value in terms of the products that they're offering, because it is a relatively crowded marketplace, right? There are a lot of different options out there, which is why I, personally, I'm grateful to you, Chad, and the AI Content Dojo for at least trying to sort through some of them. Do you have any final or last words that you would offer to people interested in the area, or that you think kind of speaks to the future of where you think this stuff is headed?
Yeah, I would say uh, AppSumo. Be careful of the AppSumo deals. Not just because you're gonna get. There's no. I'm not saying anything about people getting ripped off or anything, but like you said, there's just tools coming out left and right, and you don't know if any of them are going to be in it for the long haul. Anyways, a lifetime deal might not really turn out to be so lifetime.
Yeah, lifetime could be
And
a week.
right. And the interesting thing is if you never really settle on a tool, you probably will never get into it well enough to really make true use of it. You might get something from it, but you won't reach that phase where you're dancing with the AI. And that's why I'm so into Shortly, and all that content I've created is it will help you get past that initial hurdle of, huh, what's this? Move on. You know, once you see it, once you get into the dance and you settle in, whatever your tool is, if it offers that ability, that's the one you should settle in on one and almost kind of put on the blinders because I mean this is only the beginning and there's going to be who knows how many more of these that crop up doing roughly the same thing, but they're going to say they have their own little angle, and maybe they do. That's why I'm going to keep my eyes on it, but that's my job as the AI Content Dojo. And if something really interesting comes out, I will definitely be talking about it in the dojo.
Right on. Well, again, we encourage folks to go check out aicontentdojo.com. Great website with lots of various resources. Big thanks again, Chad, for staying up late, Tokyo time, and having a chat with us. It's been really informative, and it gives me, a good sense of kind of what is coming next, or at least what to keep an eye out for. But I will certainly continue to be an active member of your Facebook group because that's a great way to learn. And I'll post this video there directly via Facebook so that other folks can get a sense of your perspective and get a sense of who you are and show you the gratitude you deserve for providing the knowledge that you do and the organizing you do.